But at the same time, it was a point of pride. You know, the Air Force's, like I said, the Air Force's one and only job is to keep our skies safe. And here we have these weird objects being sighted all over the country and actually all over the world. And the Air Force is completely powerless they can't identify these things. They can't chase them down. They can't figure out what they're made of or where they come from or who's piloting them. If they are in fact vehicles, they're just completely clueless. So you know, the UFO studies from the Air Force really came out of this really, really pressing need to kind of assure the American public that, number one, we're safe, we're not under threat, and number two, the Air Force actually knows what it's doing.
Yeah, they knew what they were doing. I for a long time, and they're still doing it. I hate to say it, they tried to debunk everything.
Oh yeah,
that's like
yeah.
You know, like recently, you know, that footage that came out from the Navy 2 fighters. You know, back when I think it was released around November. I mean, I was even surprised that hit, you know, the news media, the internet, and they really didn't try debunking that too much.
Well, yeah, that's that whole episode. I have to say, I am completely undecided about. I have some problems with it. I definitely have some problems with it. And you're right. The Air Force hasn't come out and debunked it, which seems really weird to me. I still don't really understand how these people got a hold of this Air Force footage. That's a whole other topic, though. I don't know if we could spend the whole show tonight talking about that, and there are many other things to talk about. So I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, at least not just now. But yeah, it's an interesting case, and it does raise a lot of interesting questions. And so far, nobody really seems to have any good answers. I'll just put it that way.
Oh, that, or maybe they got caught with their pants down this time.
It's possible. It's possible. They sure haven't. I'm surprised that the fighter pilots are being allowed to talk publicly about this. I guess that's one of the most surprising things to me, is that if this all really happened, it's very weird that the Air Force is allowing these pilots to speak so freely about it, unless it represents a complete change of policy by the Air Force, which, you know, I guess that's possible too.
Well, yeah, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole, but I am concerned on one thing. You know, you had that video, you know, leak out, and then about a month or so later, you had the Secretary of the Air Force, you know, in front of the cadet class, you know, saying, hey, the next war is not going to be a ground war. You know, it's going to be out in outer space. That was brought up, which I thought was kind of really strange, because you could take it two ways. You could think, oh, maybe Russia, China, will be rockets and they'll be fought out in outer space, or maybe it could be something else. And then a couple months ago, we had our president, you know, jokingly say, hey, maybe we should create a space force. Now he instructed to do that. And I kind of find it so strange. We didn't have money to replace the shuttles. We destroyed the rockets we had that went up to the moon and the extra capsules we had. And, you know, and they're talking about going to Mars, but yet we never went back and really put anybody on the moon and see how long they could live. I'm just wondering if maybe it's something is strange, you know, in the fire, and that they can't maybe keep it in the can too much longer.
That's some interesting thinking.
Well, that's just my thinking.
Is. I see where you're going with that.
I guess I watch sci-fi and Comet and all those stuff, and watching those Class B or actually Class C. You know, the space movies that are so bad that they're good.
Oh yeah, I love those. As I said before, I'm addicted to all that stuff.
Oh yeah, that's my problem. So. Let's go more in depth a little bit, what you can, about the book. I mean, we got an hour and a half. So, I mean, you know, whatever you volunteer and want to talk about, Michael comes on, because I know he's going to have 1,000,001 questions, because, you know, he's the paranormal lawyer. And being a lawyer, he's going to have questions. All right.
That's a little intimidating, but I'll do my best.
Oh, he's not an intimidating person at all.
All right. Good. We'll do fine, I'm sure. Yeah. Back to the book. I guess. one of the things I can say about it is, I mentioned that one of the things that got me so enthused about it was the fact that I could tell these two stories: the story of Dr. Hynek's UFO work, and then the story of his scientific work as an astronomer. But there were a couple other things about him that really, really intrigued me. One of them was the fact that he was very much a scientist. He needed to see the facts in front of him. He would not be convinced by anything except facts. So in that sense, he was like the ideal scientist. But at the same time, he also had this kind of almost mystical side to him, which I found really intriguing. When he was in high school and college, a lot of us will start, reading and being exposed to really interesting schools of thought when we're at that age. Well, Hynek was no different. He started learning about the Rosicrucians, and he started reading about this interesting spiritual educator named Rudolf Steiner, and really became intrigued with these ideas of parallel dimensions, and being able to visit the past and being able to make contact with the dead. And I think that was especially interesting to him because he had lost both of his parents when he was a teenager. He was an only child. So here he is, an only child and an orphan. And he's going to school to become an astronomer, and he's spending night after night, gazing into infinity in this gigantic telescope at the Yerkes Observatory in Wisconsin. And Mark Rodiger from CUFOS, he told me, you can see where that kind of experience could, induce some mystical thinking in certain people, and that definitely seemed to happen with Hynek. So that was another thing about his career and his personality that I thought would make a really good story for the book. And the third thing, and this is the thing that probably most of your readers will be most familiar with, the third thing was the swamp gas incident. A lot of people, when they hear swamp gas, they know immediately what you're talking about. At the very least, people know it has something to do with UFOs, but if people have read about or studied UFOs, then they know that swamp gas refers to this very, very famous UFO case in 1966. Took place in southern Michigan. And this was when Hynek had been working for the Air Force pretty steadily for almost 20 years. Hynek had been researching UFO cases for the Air Force. So he had a pretty good idea after 20 years, what was legit and what wasn't. So in March of 1966, there's just a whole series of UFO sightings in southern Michigan. First, there's sightings by law enforcement officers all around the area. For a couple of weeks, they keep seeing these strange lights in the sky, and sometimes they give chase to them. And of course, they never catch up with them. But there was all sorts of talk around southern Michigan about all these weird sightings by the local policemen. And then there was a sighting at this farm. This is all sort of in the general vicinity of Ann Arbor. There was a sighting at this farm with a family living on the farm who saw some strange lights in a swamp down below their house. And the father and the son went down to investigate, and they saw these weird glowing lights in the swamp, and they would disappear and reappear somewhere else, and they would rise and fall like they were under some kind of control. And the family calls the police, and before you know it, there are police cars from all over the region showing up at this farm wanting to see the UFOs, and it becomes national news. And then the very next night, about less than 100 miles from this farm, very next night, a bunch of college co-eds at Hillsdale College, they also see virtually the same kind of thing that the farm family described. They see these glowing lights. They're mostly red and green and yellow, and they're floating in the Arboretum, which had some swampy areas to it. This being March, it's springtime, so there are a lot of marshy waterlogged areas. So about 80 or 90 students from this dormitory spend a couple hours watching these strange lights out in the Arboretum across the street, and they're convinced that they're seeing a UFO, just like the farm family was. Well, between these two cases, this story becomes a huge, huge national story, and it really puts the Air Force on the spot. So they need to explain away these UFOs as quickly as they can. So they send Dr. Hynek to southern Michigan, and he gets there on a Tuesday, and he's investigating all day Wednesday and all day Thursday and all day Friday, and then at the end of the day Friday, his boss at the Air Force forces him to hold a press conference in Detroit. Well, at the press conference, of course, everybody's just super excited because the people who are interested in the UFO phenomenon are excited because they think this is going to be the big one. They think this is the case that's going to prove to the world that not only are UFOs real, but they are spaceships from another planet. So all the UFO people are super excited about it because of that. The Air Force is excited about it because they think we're going to kill this UFO phenomenon here and now. We're finally going to be rid of it. So they force Hynek to have this press conference, and he's put on the spot because he hasn't had enough time to really fully research all the sightings, and he feels like he's totally unprepared for this press conference. Well, he gets up to the podium and he starts to talk, and he says, although I couldn't prove it in a court of law, I think it's possible that all these people have been seeing swamp gas. Well, Hynek had more to say, but nobody wanted to listen to anything else he had to say, because as soon as they heard the word swamp gas, all the reporters ran to their phones and called in their stories and said, hey, the Air Force's number one UFO expert just called everybody in Michigan an idiot because they can't tell swamp gas from a UFO. So it became this huge, huge national fear. Pretty much the entire state of Michigan was furious at the Air Force for the way they had treated the whole thing. Everybody hated Hynek. The Air Force hated Hynek because he had embarrassed them completely with the way he handled things. All of Hynek's UFO colleagues were also angry with him. I mean, not just angry, furious with him, because they felt that he had just told a lie to cover for the Air Force. So Hynek couldn't get a break. People on both sides of the UFO issue were furious with him after the swamp gas interview, and he beat it back to Illinois, back to Chicago. He did not want to stick around. And he just got lambasted in the media, in newspapers, and in TV and radio news. Everybody was just making fun of Hynek because they just thought swamp gas was such a stupid excuse, a stupid explanation, and he was obviously lying or making it up.
One thing, though, I want to mention, Mark, because
Sure.
of that, I mean, when I was young, I don't know how many times people would say, oh, what you're talking about, the swamp gas. People use that term for almost everything. So, I mean, he created a term that basically debunked anything, and he didn't realize it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and that's kind of one of the interesting little twists to Hynek's life story that I enjoyed so much and made it so much fun to write the book. Is you're right. I mean, that basically became a pop culture catchphrase before anybody even knew what a pop culture catchphrase was.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, all you have to do is say swamp gas, and people know you're talking about UFOs. It's really fascinating. So, and Hynek is the guy who started it. But it's important to remember, though, that he did say, I couldn't prove it in a court of law. So he wasn't totally convinced that it was swamp gas. He just thought it was a strong possibility that it was swamp gas. But nobody heard that. Everybody thought they heard J. Allen Hynek saying, every UFO that's ever been sighted was swamp gas. That's the story that came out from that Detroit press conference. So it couldn't have gone worse. It just couldn't have gone worse for Hynek. He became like public enemy number one. But, and this is one of the most surprising things I found in my research, and this I found at the Northwestern University archives. In his correspondence files from 1966 all the way through the late 60s, right after the swamp gas incident, even though